Good morning and welcome. I'm David Wilson. This is OverDeVest Nurseries and we're here this morning in the display and trial area, and as you see we're starting now to do some of our spring cleanup, which also involves pruning some of the shrubs in this area. Now over the last little while when I've been looking at all the comments, and by the way thank you very much for sending all your kind and appreciative comments, we really find that very reassuring. Nice to know that what we're doing is helpful. But also in this video we're going to take you through and show you some of the things that you can do with some of the shrubs and pruning them in your garden. We're getting a lot of questions: when do I do it, how do I do it, what needs pruning, what doesn't need pruning, and so on. It's a big subject. We're going to show you at least some of the principles of that. And also we know that these videos are being watched quite literally from all over the world. So it would be interesting, we've never done this before, but it would be interesting if you could send us a little comment right now to let us know where you're viewing this from. And of course also, if you can subscribe to our videos, you'll be notified the very second we post each of our new videos going forward. Now, before I get into pruning, let me give you a couple of pointers on some tools. Probably the most important tool that I use are these pruners, or what we used to call in the UK secateurs. As you see, this is a professional pair. It's worth, I think, investing in a good comfortable pair. This happens to be one that's been ergonomically designed so that it fits very comfortably into your hands, and if you're likely to be doing a lot of pruning work, something like this will really pay off in the end. And the other thing that I use quite a lot, particularly for some of the heavier branches, are long handled loppers like these. These also have what we call a parrot beak on the lip of them here, and with the longer handles you're able to get in there and take out some of the thicker branches, or perhaps if there's suckers coming up from the base of a tree or something like that, that works very well. One thing you'll have seen me do in the videos that we've filmed before on pruning is that periodically I'll go through and spray the blades and clean them off with alcohol. This is very important to do, particularly if you are working with sickly plants, because there's a chance that you're likely to transfer whatever's causing the problem with one plant to another. So it's just a little hygiene worth doing, and that should be done on things like hedging shears and pruning saws too. So anywhere that you've got a cutting blade on the likes of these hedging shears or a pruning saw like this one, clean them off too, and you'll find that not only will it keep the tools nice and clean and so on, but it'll also probably help to keep them lasting longer too. And another tool that I use, as well as the hand pruning saw, is this one, which comes with an extending handle, and this allows you to reach up into the tops of, well, maybe not into the tops of trees, but well up into the upper reaches of the trees, so that you're able to do the pruning work there and not have to climb on ladders and things like that. So this is a valuable little tool to have as well. So the question is, why do we need to prune? Well, the basic thing about pruning is that you're really controlling the growth, or perhaps redirecting the growth in a certain way. And there are many different ways that we can do it, and I'm going to run through some of the sections here. One of the ones, of course, is to try and have the plants so that they're more in size, more in proportion to the size of the site that you might have. It may be that some of your plants have got a little too big, in which case you need to take them down and reduce the size on them. But remember that when you prune something back, it's still producing growth from the base of the plant. Those roots are still sending up the energy to the top of the plant, and when you cut it back, it's not stopping it. That growth, that energy is still coming up and wanting to come out somewhere near the top of the plant. So while you'll keep them smaller to a degree, it's not going to be that proportion, because they're still going to be wanting to push up. I liken it sometimes to having a hose pipe with water going out the end. Just because you cut the top of the hose pipe doesn't stop the water coming out. The same applies to the plants. So one of the things that I would suggest with foliage plants like this golden colored spirea here, and this nice little purple compact growing barberry, this is one of the non-invasive types. This is one called Crimson Cutie, which is a gorgeous thing. As you see, they're just now breaking growth, and if you wanted to, you could go in with hedging shears and you can quite literally just go in and just trim the top off them and make them more shapely. You can do it with the likes of the spirea there, but also this little barberry. If it's producing some wilder shoots out to the side, you can just go in and just trim them back like that, and that will reshape up the plant. Because there's two things about this. Because when you prune them habitually over a period of years, you're going to get a lot of congested growth inside the plant. What I then do is often go in with a pair of pruners and thin them back inside the plant, taking back any shoots like this one that's crossing inside the plant, and so that helps to open it up a little bit and makes it more informal looking, not just a totally compact mound. Now it may be, excuse me for saying it, may be that you're an engineer type and you like everything exactly the same. If that's the way you like it and it's your garden, and of course you can do what you like in your garden, that's absolutely fine. But personally, I like to have them looking more natural, and therefore that's why I go in and trim back some of the shoots inside the plant to give it that little bit more of an informal look and appearance. Now, there are then some foliage plants like this evergreen over here that doesn't sprout well from the old wood, and it's very important with it that you start pruning it as a young plant and then keep at it, and that's what I'm going to do now with this little chamois cypress golden mop. And this is a very interesting little slow growing evergreen, really a coniferous species, and like most of the coniferous species, with a few exceptions like yew, most of them do not sprout well from the old wood at the bottom of the plant. So it's important to keep the growth at the perimeter of the plant nice and juvenile and healthy, and therefore to start pruning it early on in its life. And this is a plant that's probably planted every year by the thousand, perhaps even the tens of thousands. Many people think that because it looks so nice and small and compact as a small plant in the garden center, that it's going to stay that well. Well, it doesn't. It is slow growing, and it's really beautiful, and a gorgeous, very nice selection because of all of this bright golden foliage that has a lovely textural effect. But it also in time can get quite big, up to 12 and sometimes 15 foot high. So therefore, one of the tricks with this is, first of all, to make sure that you're buying a good clone. Unfortunately, out there in the industry are a lot of ones that are kind of like the top of this plant here now. Long, rangy old plants, and that's because over the years, nurserymen have been taking cuttings off the top of the plants, off the top of the plants, off the top of the plants, and they've changed the characteristic of this variety. And our clone here that we have, that's offered through our garden centres, is much closer to the original one that Humphrey Welsh, in his Pygmy Arboretum in Devizes, Wiltshire, seen when he named the original plant Golden Mop. He said that when he seen it, it looked like the head of an old mop, and therefore that's why he called it golden mop. So the first thing to do when you're out and about is to make sure that you're getting a good clone and not these open rangy ones that I'm talking about. The second thing is, when you have it growing in the garden like this young plant now, is to then take a pair of hedging shears, or if you want, you can do it with pruners too, and just go around and snip off the tips of these shoots. Now you can do it like I'm doing here. If I move around here, you'll be able to see this better. I gather them in a little handful like so, and then just trim that off so that you're able to keep that nice and flush, as you see, but also lots of the soft growth down here. And also then you can take out, see these long rangy ones here that are coming up from the inside of the plant, you can trim those back, and basically that's how you manage to keep it small and compact and the way that the original plant was designed to be. Because if you keep doing this over a period of years, snipping it back now in early spring, which is a great time to do it, these young growths will then grow out and they'll stay nice and colourful and fresh looking and keep the characteristic of the original variety, and you'll also be able to keep it smaller and more compact too. So let me show you that again. So you just really gather it in with your fingers so that you've got like a little tuft of hair, and you can go in then with the pruners and just shear that back. If there's any bits like this where there's a little bit of brown deadwood on it, obviously that comes out. So you can just go through, work your way around the plant, and in no time at all you'll have it nice and shapely. Now, to save time, and you can do this perfectly well with the pruners, the only thing to do is not go in and prune into this hardwood here, which is where most people make the mistake with this plant, because they don't do anything to it as a young plant. They wait for it to get so big that then when they're going in pruning, they really can't go in to this older wood, and that's where the mistake is. So the important thing with this variety and ones like it is to start off early in the life of the plant. And like I just said a minute or two ago, to save time, I find, and certainly here in the nursery we do the same, that if we go in with hedging shears like I'm doing now, you can speed up the whole process a lot quicker. You can get a nice shapely little plant, and you'll keep it so that it's nice and colourful and puts on a terrific show. So that's examples of a couple of the plants that are grown really for their ornamental foliage. Of course, when it comes to pruning shrubs, most of the shrubs were growing really for their flowers. And that is broken down into two different types of plants. The first is ones like this smooth hydrangea here. This is hydrangea Annabelle. Buddleias are the same, Vitex is pretty much the same, ones that grow out and flower on the current year's growth. If you look at these stems here, you'll see that they've grown out from the base of the plant, made all this growth last year, and then carried the flowers. These are the old leftover flowers from last year. And at this time of year, the time is now in early spring, just when they're beginning to grow, is to go in and prune these hard back. And if you look through here on this channel, there are several videos there that will show you about how to prune the individual varieties and these types of flowering shrubs. So basically these are the ones that flower on the current year's growth. You cut them back, and then the more they grow, the bigger and better and more impressive the flowers are going to be. And a very good example of a flowering shrub that flowers on the current year's growth are, of course, these things, the panicle hydrangeas. These are the ones that make those gorgeous big white flowers that, if you look at them closely during the summertime, produce all of these long stems and then the big flower at the top. And if you look through this channel, you'll discover one of our most popular videos that's showing you how to prune them and how you can get that desired effect by going in and pruning them now in early spring. And then there's what I call the rebloomers. Roses are an excellent example of that. As you see, we've been through and we pruned them now. They'll shortly start putting out some growth, and on that will be their first flush of flowers. Then if you go through and remove the old flower heads, we call it deadheading, you'll find that they will rebloom again, and sometimes they'll even rebloom again if you keep deadheading them. Some of the other shrubs that work really well in that category too are the Japanese spireas I was showing you earlier. They are really good at reblooming. Weigela is another excellent example, and especially some of the newer reblooming varieties. You can encourage those to be almost constantly in flower during the whole of the growing season. Ninebark Physocarpus is another one, and so is Potentilla. There's really quite a few shrubs that if you watch this channel as we talk about the individual varieties, we'll often mention about the removal of old flower heads and how you can keep that colour going right through the whole of your gardening season. And then the second type of flowering shrub are the ones that flower on the wood that was made the previous year. And here is a nice little Deutzia. This is Deutzia Nico, one that I filmed a video of in my own garden that showed it in flower, but also how to prune it after it finishes flowering. And if you look closely at the stems on there, you'll see that they have tiny little flower buds. And if you look at this particular plant here, which is a very good example of what I'm talking about, this is a gorgeous variety called Spice Island of the Korean spice bush, Viburnum Spice Island. And if you look here, you'll see that it is absolutely loaded with lots of these, I suppose you would call it maroon, rosy red flower buds that in another couple of weeks will be opening to flowers about this size that are white tinged pink and have the most fantastic fragrance. This is an excellent variety that's nice and compact, and as you see, very free flowering. But the reason I'm showing it to you is that if you were to prune that now at this time of year, and this is an exaggeration of what I'm talking about, but if you were to prune it, obviously you'd be pruning off flowers. So with these types of shrubs, Forsythia is another good example. What you do is you wait for them to flower, and then you go in and you prune them after they finish flowering. And with a plant like this, it's the same principle as before. You go in and thin out the plant, shorten back some of the shoots so that you get it nice and bushy and compact, growing strongly, and then it sets its flowers during the summertime. They go through the winter, and now in early summer, when these all break out, it gives a glorious display. And an excellent example of a shrub that flowers on growth that was made during the previous season are these. These are, of course, magnolias. Betty and Jane, two excellent selections from the DeVos series, which was introduced some years ago from the National Arboretum. A little bit later flowering than some of the other magnolias, so they usually miss most of the killing frosts in springtime. And if you would like to find out specifically how you could prune a magnolia like these, stay tuned, because shortly we'll be posting a video that we filmed in my garden in response to a viewer's question about how to prune a magnolia. So that will be up shortly, and then you'll be able to find out how you can prune magnolias in your garden. And then, at the risk, as they say in Ireland, of telling your grandmother how to suck eggs, another shrub that flowers on growth that was made the previous year are, of course, these things, the hydrangea macrophyllus, or the mophead hydrangeas. These are the ones that you don't prune in springtime, because nowadays some of the varieties are what we call remontant varieties. They flower on the new wood as well as the old, but most of the varieties that we have in our gardens are the old-fashioned types that grew out during the summertime, focused the growth of the flower bud right here in the tip of the little shoot. It's overwintered now during the winter time, and now in springtime it's just starting to emerge. And if you go in and prune these at this time of year, you are of course then cutting off the flowers. Now in a little bit, when these grow out and flower, we'll be coming back in here to show you how you can prune this specific type of hydrangea. So stay tuned for that also. Meanwhile, now in early spring, if you've got old woody plants like these ones here, which are really honestly probably getting near the end of their life, you'll see on them a lot of old, brittle, dead stems like these. When you touch them, they break. Those, of course, can be removed. They're dead anyway, so you might as well take those out. But be sure to leave the young supple shoots with a bud on the top of it, because that's where the flowers are. And with evergreens like these arborvitaes here, it's important as young plants that you keep an eye on them too, and perhaps do some corrective pruning if you need to. Now you'll see that this variety, which incidentally is one called Junior Giant, a very shapely, really nice compact variety of arborvitae. Most of these plants down here are already making nice growth, but on this particular one I've noticed that it's got 2 leaders, and so that if you have this happening in your garden, it's very important that you get in early and remove one of the leaders, so that you keep one, the strongest one, growing up through the middle, because that is going to be structurally much sounder. You see, if they've got a competing leader like this, if you get snow load, or also perhaps after a snowstorm, they can splay apart, so that if you catch this early and go in with your pruners, you can go in and remove that and then allow this leader to grow up through. Now, there's the old nurseryman's trick of going through with a knife, and you can go through and you can shape these up too. It's really very easy to do with a knife or with pruners if you want. This is now going to grow out and make that strong central leader and be, as you see, a very nice green. And another category to mention is the semi-evergreen things like abelias. This is a variety from First Editions, very nice, called Vanilla Brandy. It's absolutely gorgeous. As you see now, it's dropped most of its leaves. It's just starting to put out young growth on it, and I usually, when I'm pruning these, like to see them come back after the winter time. Sometimes it's not happening on these plants, but sometimes you'll get little dead tips, and you can go in at that point with a pair of pruners and just remove the dead tips, or now, as I like to do with hedging shears, is just go through and shape them up a little bit by removing the old wayward shoots on the top here and getting it back to a nice shapely habit again. And then the last category that I want to tell you about today in terms of pruning shrubs, the different types, are these, what are generally referred to as dieback shrubs. Sometimes butterfly bushes fall into this category, particularly if you live in the more northerly, colder parts of our region. The top of the plant is effectively dead after the winter time, but if you look in at the crown, you'll see now at this time of year in early spring young growth appearing from the base. Sometimes it might occur about halfway up depending on the variety. This particular batch here, 3 plants, is a very nice variety of Hypericum. This is Hypericum pumpkin. It grows, as you see, about 3 to 4 foot high, carries little yellow flowers during the summertime, and then sets in the late summer and autumn time to produce pumpkin colored seed pods on the tops of the shoots that are absolutely gorgeous at that time of year. But the nature of the beast is to die back to the crown, sometimes referred to also as a sub-shrub. So at this time of year, what I usually do is wait until time until things warm up a little bit, until I see the young growth coming through from the base, and then with a pair of pruners, it's really just a matter of going back through the stems and chopping off the old dead shoots that are on the top. As I mentioned a minute or two ago, sometimes they might be alive about halfway up. So in that case, when that happens, you can start at the top of the shoot, and if you're wondering, work your way down the stem until you find green growth at the bottom, and then that's when you know that's as far as you need to go. So start at the top. Just look at the stems. If you're wondering about it, with the blade of your pruner, you can just make a little nick in the stem, and here it's brown, so that tells you that it's dead. And then just work your way back to the young growth that's just now emerging out of the ground, and it'll regrow out, of course, produce lots of growth, those yellow flowers, and then these gorgeous seed pods on the top that incidentally make wonderful items for putting into floral arrangements. So there, as you see, is a couple of ideas or suggestions as to what you can do for pruning in your garden. As you watch the various videos here on this channel, and particularly as you scroll through the individual varieties, you'll often hear me talk about specific terms about how you should prune them, whether they like to be pruned in the springtime or after flowering or whatever. So stay tuned, and thank you for watching. This is David Wilson. Enjoy your gardening. It's good for us, and it's very good for our environment too.